Hello everybody, and welcome back to King Kong Month. I'm Jack. Now we will be talking about the third King Kong remake, the 2005 Peter Jackson King Kong. Now, as I said in my review for that film, the Dino De Laurentiis' 1976 King Kong didn't exactly live up to the original, and we were all waiting for a remake that did. Peter Jackson was one of the many people who was inspired by the original King Kong. It was his favorite film of all time. In 1996, he actually did try to remake the movie, but unfortunately it ended up being cancelled. Until he directed the Lord of the Rings trilogy in 2001 to 2003, and those films were a huge success. So Peter Jackson was allowed to direct any film he wanted, so naturally he decided to finally make his King Kong remake. The film's plot is very similar to the plot of the original King Kong. A filmmaker named Carl Denham comes across a young girl named Ann Darrow, who recently lost her job working in vaudeville. He hires her to be the actress of his next movie, which he is shooting on Skull Island. When they arrive, the natives take Anne captive and offer her up as a sacrifice to the gorilla King Kong, and it's up to Jack Driscoll, Carl Denham, and the rest of the crew to bring her back. Now this is by far the most nostalgic King Kong film for me. I remember when this film first came out, and all the hype and the buzz. I remember watching the trailers for this movie over and over and over again. I also collected a lot of the merchandise for this movie, like the King Kong and V-Rex figures. I even had a giant roaring V-Rex, which I do still have even to this day, as well as a Skull Island playset. And when I finally did see this movie, what did I think? It didn't live up to the original. It surpassed it. This movie is not only as good as the original, I think it's even better. Now, by hearing the plot, you can tell that this film is a lot more similar to the original than the 1976 remake, which was in some ways the intention. Peter Jackson didn't make this film to make money, like most other remakes. He made it as a love letter to his favorite film of all time. The film is the perfect combination of the two other King Kong remakes. It has the action and the adventure of the 1933 King Kong, but also the love story and the emotion of the 1976 King Kong, though not nearly as over the top. Let's start out with the characters. First, we have Naomi Watts as Ann Darrow. She is phenomenal in this movie. She doesn't just spend most of her time screaming when she's around Kong. She's actually quite brave. She's actually able to stand up to Kong in some scenes. And the love story in this version is executed brilliantly. With very few dialogue, they convey so much emotion. We also have Jack Black as Carl Denham. Now, a lot of people out there think that this was an extremely bad miscast. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a fan of Jack Black. Most of the movies that I've seen him in, I find him extremely annoying. That being said, I honestly loved him as Carl Denham. His over-the-top acting really does lend to this role. He has those wide, somewhat crazy eyes, and I find it easy to buy that this is a very desperate and ambitious filmmaker. We also get a little bit more backstory on his character. The studio executives want to scrap his movie, but he's not gonna have any of that crap. He needs Jack Driscoll to finish the script for him, so he tricks Jack by taking a long time to pay him, so that he'll be stuck on the ship and be forced to finish the script for him. Carl Denham's character does also show signs of caring about his crew members. For example, when his cameraman Herb is being attacked by venatosaurs, he actually makes an attempt to save him and feels horrible when Herb eventually ends up being eaten by them. Whenever a member of his crew dies, he constantly says that he'll finish the film for them and donate the proceeds to their wife and kids, and surprise, surprise, he doesn't. His character goes through an extreme development. At the beginning of the movie, he seems like a good guy, even if he is quite ambitious. But as the movie goes on, his character slowly descends into madness. Where in the original film, Carl Denham's character seemed like he just made the wrong choice, this Carl Denham seems like he genuinely turned into a psychopath. Now, I know a lot of people have trouble buying the fact that Anne would actually come with this guy when he seems so obviously out of his mind, but I didn't mind it that much. There's also Adrian Brody as the new Jack Driscoll. Now, what I like about this Jack Driscoll is that he's not a tough guy. He's actually nothing more than a playwright. And the relationship between him and Anne is much more stronger in this film than it was in the original. Part of it is because his character doesn't act like a complete douchebag. There's also a lot of side characters in this movie. There's somewhat of a a father-son relationship between the character of Mr. Hayes, the first mate, and Jimmy, a relationship that eventually ends in tragedy, similar to Anne and Kong's relationship. I think my favorite new supporting character in this movie would have to be the character of Bruce Baxter. He's the man Carl Denham hired to be the leading actor in his movie. His character is clearly a very famous man, having appeared in many films as the hero. However, what I like about his character is that he is quite sensible. Captain Englehorn tells him and the rest of the crew that they have 24 hours to rescue Anne. When it seems that they have no trace of Anne, he comes to the conclusion that she is dead, and that they should all go back or else they'll be stranded there. Now, on the surface, this could seem very cold-hearted and mean, but on the other hand, he does bring up a good point, that while Anne was a great girl, and it's a shame that she's dead, they all might be dead if they don't get back to the ship fast. However, his character does come back later and show that he is, in many ways, the hero that he was built up as on screen. He rescues Jack, Carl, and some of the other sailors from being eaten by the bugs in the bug pit later in the film. The villagers in this version are genuinely horrifying, and unlike in the original where they worship Kong, in this version, they fear Kong. Peter Jackson has openly said that the idea behind these natives is that they aren't the original natives on the island. There originally was a completely different tribe of natives that eventually died out, and these new ones came in and took their places. And of course, we get to the big gorilla himself, King Kong. Andy Serkis, the guy who played Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, returned to play King Kong in this film using motion capture. This movie's version of Kong is the best version of Kong that we've got in any Kong movie so far, in my opinion. Besides the fact that the CGI is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, holy crap, you totally believe that this thing is actually there. There is so much emotion given to this character. This really does feel like a real-life creature. The way it moves and the way it pounds its chest and the way it makes extremely scary roaring noises. There are times in this movie where his character is absolutely horrifying. I remember watching this movie and just getting goosebumps whenever he was on screen. But as the film goes on, you begin to sympathize with his character, and you see that his character is very lonely. It's hinted at that he was in fact part of a tribe of gorillas, as there are skulls of other gorillas in his cave, probably his family. I like how it isn't given away in total detail and is only hinted at. Kong even has his fair share of funny moments in this movie, and not cheesy funny. There's a scene in which Anne tries to entertain him by doing vaudeville performance, and Kong only likes it when she falls over. Anne eventually stands up to him, and Kong throws a tantrum. Now, this film is a lot more similar to the original King Kong than the 1976 remake, which is understandable because Peter Jackson made this movie really as an homage to the original. The film is once again set in 1933 in New York. There are even some lines that were taken right from the original King Kong. That being said, the film does still add changes there to make it feel like its own movie. For example, we spend a lot more time with the characters before they go on the journey. We see that Ann Darrow worked in vaudeville and actually had a very optimistic personality, but once the vaudeville theater closed, all of her hope is gone. We also see that Carl Denham isn't exactly the most popular or the most successful filmmaker working. He actually becomes a wanted man when he decides to go off and make his picture despite the studio execs not permitting him to. In this version, as I said, they make Jack Driscoll's character a playwright, which I thought was an interesting change. The ship is once again called the SS Venture, and speaking of that ship, let's talk about the voyage there. It does go on for probably a little bit too long. However, I still think that it is still very well paced. Each scene is important to the plot. Each scene builds character. Yeah, it does take quite a long time to eventually get to the island and to Kong, but the build-up certainly keeps you interested still. This film's version of Skull Island is by far my favorite version of Skull Island. Unlike the last remake, where it was very pretty, this Skull Island is very run down and very dirty. And this time there are plenty of creatures, not just dinosaurs, on the island. There's a Centrosaurus scene that kind of plays as an homage to the Stegosaurus scene from the original King Kong. a Brontosaurus stampede scene, a swamp scene similar to the swamp scene with the Brontosaurus in the original King Kong, a log scene just like the one in the original, and my personal favorite out of them all, a fight between Kong and 3 V-Rexes, similar to the fight between Kong and the T-Rex in the original King Kong. And as much as I love that fight, this fight blows that one off the map completely. The idea of Kong fighting 1 T-Rex is awesome enough, but now 3? How much more awesome can you get? And on top of that, these aren't T-Rexes, these are V-Rexes, the advanced descendants of the carnivorous hunter. Peter Jackson said he wanted to make the fight feel more like a brawl, and it really does feel like that. It starts out pretty simple, but then they all get tangled up in vines. Kong then fights the V-Rex head-on down below and rips its jaw just like in the original. He even plays with it just like in the original King Kong. This movie is filled to the gills with many different exciting action scenes, all of them feeling different in their own way. Remember what I said in the last review about how the Skull Island in the 76 version of Kong wasn't very creative or imaginative? Well, this Skull Island is incredible. Like in the original, Kong is eventually captured, and they just cut to New York City. And much like in the original, Kong is put on stage in the Broadway theater. And another nice homage to the original King Kong is that the music that the orchestra plays as Kong is being presented is in fact the original Max Steiner score from the original King Kong. A nice homage. And in this version, Anne refuses to be part of the act, similar to the way that Jack Prescott refused to be part of the act in the Dino De Laurentiis Kong. Kong eventually breaks out. And another thing that I like in this version is that there really is a true rivalry between Kong and Jack. Kong turns to Jack and recognizes him as the man who took his girlfriend away from him, and he attacks viciously. He chases Jack through the city and eventually almost kills him, until Anne comes to calm him down. The film takes a nice calm break from the action as they go into Central Park and ice skate. Yeah, that might seem a bit corny to some, but I honestly think it's rather cute. And they do get back to the action very quick. And much like in the original, the climax is on the Empire State Building. This climax is mind-blowing. Next to the heart-pounding musical score by James Newton Howard and the amazing camera angles, the emotion of this scene is right where it should be. It's not as over-the-top and ridiculous as the 1976 King Kong, it's just right. He slips away silently and falls. And unlike the last film, this movie gives a much more hopeful ending, as Jack comes to Anne to comfort her. And we do still get the message about the greed and arrogance of man, like we did in the Dino De Laurentiis version, but much more tame. People start taking pictures of Kong's dead body, and they put in the iconic line that was actually missing in the 1976 version, which I can't believe they actually did it. It was Beauty killed the Beast. Said once again by Carl Denham. Apparently they were originally going to get Fay Wray, the actress that played Anne Darrow in the original Kong, to say the line, but she passed away before they could do it. Such a shame, because I think that would have been the ultimate homage to the original Kong. The cinematography and look of this film is excellent. It could have been made any time. This movie holds up amazingly even after 11 years. The special effects are astounding, especially on Kong. And the score, once again, by James Newton Howard is phenomenal. It might rival the original score for the original Kong, in my opinion. That seems to be a tradition with these King Kong remakes. They all have an amazing score that sets it apart from the others. Howard Shore, the guy who composed the score for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, was originally going to compose the score for this film, but apparently he and Peter Jackson had some creative differences, and so he backed out. Are there problems with this movie? A couple. First of all, some of the CGI does look a tiny bit dated. Particularly the Brontosaurus stampede scene, while still a really exciting sequence, does look like they're running in front of a green screen in some shots. And speaking of the Brontosaurus stampede, the Venatosaurs that are chasing them look rather silly looking. They're supposed to be sort of the descendants of Velociraptor, but they honestly don't live up to them. Peter Jackson said that he went for more of a puppy dog look with their design, and it's honestly rather distracting. It's just hard to be intimidated by these guys. And honestly, that's it. This movie is near perfect. It's my favorite version of King Kong of all time by far, with great characters, excellent acting, exciting action scenes, mind-blowing effects, and a truly emotional story, this film gets a 10 out of 10.